This month, I challenged myself to start learning how to 3D model in Blender with no prior experience. And if that wasn't difficult enough for a daily challenge, I decided to also start daily reading and to start daily programming, just to, up the ante a little bit. And the rules were pretty simple. All I had to do was press record for each of these 3 challenges once every single day. If you want to see the long video for each of these 3 different challenges, I'll have one for each of them that has the time lapse and some commentary on that challenge for that month. But in the meantime, let's go over the grand scheme of things, how the challenges themselves went, and the life events that may or may not have gotten in the way. Week 1. So let me get this out of the way now. I didn't start on December 1st. I started on December 3rd, and that is because I had the idea on December 3rd, and I started recording and I started working on it when I had that idea. I don't believe that everything needs to start exactly on the 1st. I think that it's when you get the idea and you get the motivation to start, that's when you should start, because if you wait too long, then you're screwing yourself over. I had a really strong start. And one of the things that I think led to that was I was very fascinated and interested in these different things right off the bat. So I wanted to learn, I wanted to dive deep into it, and I had the time and availability to do that. So I leveraged it a little bit and I was able to dive in with Blender. I started to learn how to mess with materials, how to duplicate objects. I was given the challenge to create something, and of course I decided I would have been playing Halo recently, so I tried to create the Halo Reach helmet, which took me about 2.5 hours using only basic shapes. And at this time, I don't even know anything about faces, vertices, or anything. So all I'm doing is literally just taking shapes and moving them and changing the color. And I actually am quite proud of the result. I spent about 2 hours and 37 minutes in Blender this week in those 3 days. And moving on to reading, I finished this Code Complete book, which for me was a huge thing because I had spent the entire month of November, so all of last month, just getting to page 407, because this book is very dense. It's got lots of good information on every page, and I was able to read 482 pages within my 3 days that I had. So the first 3 days, which took me about an hour and 25 minutes. So I had a really strong start on both Blender and reading. And working into programming, I wanted to just get into the habit of programming. I wanted to see code every single day just to get into that mindset of working with it. And what I started working on was a project that I have been and am still working on perfecting, is this automatic flashcard program. And I've made an entire video about this, so if you want to see that, there's a link in the description to that. But basically, I just was fixing some of the legibility of the code, the functionality of it, trying to use techniques from the book that I just finished and what I was actively reading at the time. And I spent about 2 hours and 30 minutes diving deep into programming, which was really, really fun. Week 2 was pretty good, and I'm proud of what I was able to get done. I was visiting family on both Saturday and Sunday, so I had to find and make time for this challenge, which was slightly difficult. With Blender this week, I learned about messing around with the layout of Blender and using the program, getting familiar with it, as well as extruding faces, moving vertices, actually messing with geometry and shapes. I also tried fixing a spaceship model for a 3D print. I spent 2 hours on that and it didn't really go very well. I also messed with materials for different faces and extruding and messing with different objects, which was pretty interesting. I tried using Blender without a trackpad when I was at the hotel because I forgot to bring an external mouse, and I was able to make this cool little Christmas tree without it. And then the next day I made a crappy outlet because I still don't know how to make cool stuff yet. I spent a total of 4 hours and 11 minutes on Blender this week. I read 2 books this week. One of them was on overthinking and really dealing with anxiety and trying to center yourself again, especially when you get lost in thought, which happens to me sometimes. And then I also read a book on dating relationships. That one was mostly dealing with traits to look out for when dating and also different attachment styles. And it's some pretty interesting dating statistics, or at least I found them interesting. They may not be accurate, but I enjoyed them. I read a total of 373 pages for about 4 hours and 10 minutes. I continued to work on my automatic flashcard program, as well as started to add some new features to my speed reading program. I have an entire video about my speed reading program if you want to go see that out. completely separate thing, but it's what I've been using and I've been showing off while reading, and it helps me keep track, it helps me keep focused, and it helps me take notes while I'm reading. So I didn't really have any new projects I wanted to tackle, but I've always been wanting to learn how to create web applications. So I found an online course on JavaScript and I started learning that this week. I programmed for a total of 3 hours and 6 minutes. Week 3 was pretty crazy, to be honest. My sister was visiting for Christmas, and I also had a funeral that weekend, so I allowed myself to take some time off for that. This week in Blender, I was mostly just learning about a lot of fundamentals of modeling things. I learned about normals, insetting faces to make a pyramid, some loop cutting, subdividing. These are a lot of just terminologies and tools for changing just simple shapes, and it's really interesting stuff that I didn't know about 3D modeling before that now I do. So a lot of it was just going through and learning a lot of the fundamentals. I spent about an hour and 16 minutes this week on Blender. I allowed myself to spend less time just to try and keep up with the daily habit, but not having to pressure myself to do a lot. I read a book on breathing this week. It was probably one of the most dull books that I have read in a very long time, and I had to kind of just push through to finish reading it. The author just was spending a lot of time talking about things that didn't really seem necessary. And then on the flip side, I started reading this book called On Writing Well, which is amazing. Probably one of the best books that I have read in a long time, and I am learning a lot from it. So I think I read about 200 or so pages. I wasn't really keeping track because I was traveling, and I read for about an hour and 53 minutes. On the programming side of things, I was keeping up with the JavaScript course. It was really just going over a lot of the programming fundamentals, which I kind of knew from learning Java and C# beforehand, but JavaScript has a different syntax or different formatting basically. So I was just relearning a lot of the things I already kind of knew, just with different rule sets. But there was a lot of interesting things, like I didn't know that Windows key period lets you put emojis in on Windows, so that was pretty cool. I didn't know that I could use emojis, but it took me about an hour and 40 minutes, which I felt was a pretty decent amount of time for all that was going on this week. Week 4 was Christmas, and after the funeral and having a whole bunch of family and other things going on, I decided that it would be a good week to take a break. I bet you weren't expecting that. This whole video has been building up this idea that, I spent the whole month working on these things. But actually, I think this is a very important part to talk about, because there's so many videos out there of people who are like, I did Blender, I did this skill for 30 days, drawing, whatnot. And they're so cool to watch. And but I'm human, so I've got other things going on in my life. And sometimes I just need a break, and it's Christmas, so I'm like, this should be normal that we can take breaks, especially with challenges and stuff like this. Week 5 felt pretty good. I was able to get a strong finish with this project and all of the 3 different challenges, and I'm really proud of what I was able to create at the end of these 30 days. In Blender, I was able to finish off the Mayan pyramid project, which I think turned out pretty well. And I discovered that you can draw in Blender, which totally makes sense because I knew it could be used for 2D animation, but I never actually figured out how to use it until today. So I spent the past 30 days not even knowing that this part of Blender existed. And I'm sure there's plenty other parts of Blender that I don't even know about yet, but it's just cool, and it was fun to mess around with. And I started modeling a bowling ball pin, and I think it looks great, especially after 30 days and on December 3rd, I basically didn't know how to use Blender or how to move around in it, so I think it looks pretty good. I spent an hour and 40 minutes on Blender, which is I think a pretty good place to be at, where I was doing about 10 to 15 minutes per day. I finally finished the On Writing Well book, and I have to say it is one of my top books that I've read, which is a really high honor because of the amount of books that I've read. It's just really good material, and I never really truly appreciated how much thought could be put into every sentence until I read this book, because it's pretty rare to see authors spend a lot of time thinking about and showing you the word choices, the phrasing, how to what words to eliminate, little things like that. When you read a book, at least the authors that I read sometimes, it feels like they just throw words on a page and move on to the next thing. This one, you can see with every sentence how much time and thought was put into it, and the author even explains how and the thought process behind it. It's great. It's really elegantly put together, and I spent about an hour and 45 minutes reading it this week. This week in programming was just more of the fundamentals, but I did learn some really interesting thing about string literals, as well as having like if-else statements, but in a single line and as a part of an expression, which is like this super cool thing that you can't do in a lot of other programs that saves a lot of lines of code. So that's pretty cool. But other than that, it's just more of the same, just getting up to date on JavaScript and how to use it. And I'm hoping that next month I'll be able to dive deeper into actually building more useful stuff. I spent about 58 minutes, so not even a full hour, on JavaScript this week. So anyway, all of that to say, I think that I did really well actually with learning Blender for the first time. I completed 20% of the online course that I bought for Blender, which means that about 5 months or so I'll be able to finish it, which is pretty good. At least I think so anyway. And I completed about 10% of the Java online course, which means that in 10 months I'll be able to finish it. And that one is supposed to be 0 to expert. So who knows? Maybe in 10 months I'll be a JavaScript expert. And then for reading, I was able to read 6 books, which is about my actual, like my normal range for reading. So not that it was more or less, it keeps me on track to be about 50 to 60 books by the end of the year. So yeah, all good things. In total, there was about 32 hours for programming, reading, and Blender combined. It was 9 hours and 45 minutes for Blender. It was 11 hours for reading and 9 hours for programming. So all in all, fairly good. And I'm looking forward to next month and this upcoming year, especially if I'm able to keep this up. I think that this has been a great conduit for this extra time and for this learning. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you around.